Hey YouTube, Ethan here. This is part 2 of the series Fixing New Player Colonies in Oxygen Not Included, where we take a look at new players submitting their problem asteroids on the Oxygen Not Included subreddit. In this series, we analyze the screenshots that they post and all the information that we have available, and we give feedback on how these players could have improved their chances of success on the asteroid. Some of the advice that I'll give is not necessarily game-changing, but it will help you build up your colony throughout many cycles that you'll be playing. And other advice may be very critical in sustaining your base long-term. I'm going to try to gloss over the most obvious problems that are occurring in these players' asteroids, so I'm not going to get to every single detail. Obviously, there will be things I leave out due to time constraints. So if you notice something that I missed on these asteroids, please let me know in the comments, and if any new players are watching this video, they might be able to learn more just by browsing through the comments down below. Also, if you like this series, please let me know in the comments. I want to do at least one of these a week, but it really depends on if there are good bases to analyze that are submitted to the subreddit. So if you're a new player and you would like help with your base, consider posting on the subreddit and maybe I'll see your colony and I'll be able to comment on it. Even if I don't, there's plenty of very helpful people on the subreddit that will be able to help improve your chances of success. It's never a bad idea to get other people's advice or criticisms about your asteroid because they'll be able to help you in the long run. So with that, let's get into our first asteroid. This is External Structure 759. They say, I need some help. First playthrough, yes. I know my base is very disorganized. So let's take a look and see if I agree with your assessment. So the very first problem that I notice in your colony is that you haven't cleared any of your tutorial notifications. There's just no way you can be successful with these in your way like that. You gotta clear them right away. Okay, I kid. But let's take a look at what's going on here. So the first thing that I'm noticing right away is that your airflow is not good throughout this entire base. And this is something that I stressed in my last video as well. So let's start at one end, work our way over, and analyze the airflow situation. Based on where this oxygen diffuser is located, you have so much carbon dioxide building up at the bottom that it has nowhere to go, that essentially the airflow will be above the areas where your duplicants will be working. There's an oxygen diffuser here that seems to be on its own power source and its own battery. I might be wrong on this because I cannot see the electrical overlay. Since you already have a power source set up here with your coal generators, you should not need an extra battery and a hamster wheel to power this oxygen diffuser. You should have everything integrated into one electrical system, so you're not wasting duplicant time to get to this hamster wheel. And just imagine that if you had no oxygen in this area of your base, which is very likely because the airflow is not very good anyways, and if you needed this oxygen diffuser to work right away, your duplicants would have to run on this hamster wheel holding their breath. Oxygen diffuser should never be on a manual power source, unless you're at the very beginning of the game and you don't have coal generators set up yet. Now, if we take a look at what this oxygen diffuser will be actually doing, it's not doing a whole lot that's useful for your duplicants. You have at least 2 layers of carbon dioxide building up at the bottom of your work area. And if you imagine, like your duplicants are 2 tiles high, if you have carbon dioxide building up that's 2 tiles high or more, your duplicants are basically always going to be holding their breath. So you need to find a way to get rid of this carbon dioxide. And really the easiest thing to do would be to create airflow tiles where this big pit is and just let it all flow in there. Because carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen, it will always float to the very bottom of your base as far as it can go. So this oxygen diffuser, when it's creating oxygen, it's only going to blow up in this massive room where your duplicants will never be working. So this leads directly into point number 2, is you should never make your rooms more than 4 tiles high, meaning 4 tiles of space, and then the 5th layer should be your next flooring or your ceiling for that room. And this is a perfect example of why not to do that. Because if you have all this carbon dioxide accumulating, the oxygen is going to spread out to the top of this massive room where your duplicants are never working. Another huge problem with having a big room like this, if you want your duplicants to do any sort of work at the upper levels, you need to build ladders everywhere like you've done in order for that to happen. So again, if you just scroll to the right a little bit, you have ladders built up, and that was very likely because you had to build maybe plumbing here for your hydroponic tiles, or you had to build the ceiling initially. Whatever the case is, this is not a very efficient setup for long-term, especially if you have problems with carbon dioxide. When you're building your ladders for access between different elevations in your base, you want to make sure that there's a space on each side of your ladder. This will help the airflow get through and just be more efficient throughout your entire base. One of the game mechanics in Oxygen Not Included is that each tile can only be occupied by one variation of gas, liquid or solid. So if this is being blocked off by carbon dioxide that's constantly flowing through or by polluted oxygen, essentially this oxygen diffuser down here will just overpressurize and not produce any useful oxygen for you. And then if we come to the right side here, sort of in the middle of this base, again, you just have way too much carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is slowly seeping down into this level here where you have your pitcher pump. If you scroll down a little farther, there's another oxygen diffuser. It looks like it has no power. It's kind of hard to see with the resolution of this image, but this is essentially not doing anything. So you can get rid of this entirely. Because this is basically a carbon dioxide capture area, you might as well just dig everything out and let the carbon dioxide accumulate in here. And don't worry about the oxygen diffuser, because that air is going to have to try to make its way up. You might as well put this in an area where your duplicants will be working, or just get rid of it entirely. So your duplicant sleeping quarters can only get air from one direction because you have a airlock on this side, which is almost redundant. I don't know why you have that there. You should give them some more room to sleep. I know this is, what cycle are you on? Oh, you're on cycle 330. Yeah, you should definitely have private bedrooms set up by now, or private barracks at the minimum. So I would delete this altogether and use this space to create private barracks for your duplicants. At least you can give your duplicants a morale boost by giving them their own bedrooms. And then I would start redesigning your ladder layout. I would, again, remove the one tile on each side of the ladders all the way through so there's sufficient airflow, and it also helps the carbon dioxide get to the bottom quicker. So there's a lot of considerations to be made with airflow management. I'm going to stop beating the dead horse. You can see there's a lot of similar issues happening everywhere. You get the gist of it. Now, another problem that I glossed over really quickly is the hamster wheels. I see that these are disabled, so I assume you probably want to keep these batteries charged and only have your duplicants run on the hamster wheel when they're low. I don't see any other point to having these here. Tie everything into one electrical grid. This base is not big enough for you to have multiple electrical systems like you do. Tie everything into one. And get rid of the hamster wheels. They're just redundant work. You also don't need the batteries. Remember, batteries have residual losses. So the more batteries that you accumulate, the more residual losses you'll have, and that's just wasted power throughout your entire base. Now let's talk about your coal generators. Huge problem here with your air management. I see you have this mechanized airlock locked up, so duplicants can't come through. And I assume that's so they don't let the carbon dioxide seep out of this area. But carbon dioxide isn't your only concern here. You don't have any insulation, which means this area is probably getting very hot, and it's probably transferring that heat into other areas of your base, mainly your bristle blossoms down here. I think these are bristle blossoms. Regardless, whatever plant that you're trying to farm here are going to be affected by the heat of your coal generators. I'm assuming you don't have any cooling systems in place. You definitely want to move these heat generators out of your base as soon as possible, definitely by cycle 300. Your colony should have its separate power generation system somewhere else on your map that is not in your immediate base, and you should probably be off coal generators by this point. If we scroll up here, I see way too many deodorizers. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, at least 15 deodorizers that I see. And oh wow, I just noticed that you have no algae. So that means your oxygen diffusers aren't even doing anything. So you've run yourself out of algae and now you're strapped for oxygen. Now I see why these are all red. I thought maybe they just didn't have power. But you're at cycle 333 and you've completely run yourself out of algae. Immediately what you need to be doing is getting to this area in the swamp biome and digging out all the algae that you can and restocking your oxygen diffusers and get rid of the ones that you don't need, like this one. And now I see why you have all these deodorizers. Your main source of oxygen is probably coming from up at the top of the map, where the swamp biome is generating tons and tons of polluted oxygen with slime lung that is getting into your base. And that's probably causing your duplicants to be stressed out because they get sick, they have too much to do, they're working in areas where they can't work efficiently. It's all a snowball effect causing everything to just go wrong at the same time. Personally, I would restart this base and just take some of the suggestions that I made with the airflow management. That's going to help you really get a lot farther. Try to get on your electrolyzers and get a sustainable source of oxygen that is not reliant on algae. But overall, I mean, you made it to cycle 333. That's way farther than I made it on my very first playthrough. I think my very first playthrough, I might have died at like cycle 50. So, I mean, congrats to you for making it this far. That's a huge accomplishment for your very first time. Okay, now we're going to be taking a look at David Loves Animal. And David says, "Help, I don't know what this means." This building requires a duplicate to produce amplification data through experimentation. Well, David, there's a lot of problems going on here that are more important than your geotuner right now. So you're on cycle 300, which is very impressive. I assume this is one of your first playthroughs. The first thing that you should do to fix this base is immediately throw down some deodorizers. Now, I'm usually against using deodorizers in general in mass quantities because they take a lot of filtration, they take a lot of dupe labor, and if your dupes don't get to them in time, then essentially you're going to be letting in polluted oxygen throughout your entire base. What I like to do instead is not allow the polluted oxygen to get into my base to begin with. And polluted oxygen is not that bad in small quantities, but your duplicants will eventually get sick. They'll cough a lot, they'll get slime lung, they'll have reduced efficiency, they'll have higher stress, none of which you have right now, which is very impressive. It's just something that you want to avoid. It's also about the aesthetics, right? So if you have a base with nice clean oxygen, it just looks so much better than having green oxygen everywhere, you know what I mean? Just at a glance, you have a lot of gas pumps everywhere. I'm not sure the reason for that. I assume you're using some sort of system that helps push air around your base because you have problems with airflow. And I can definitely see why you don't have any ladders that go up and down at particular intervals throughout your base. This is kind of very long corridors that have no airflow exchange in between the different elevations. So it's something that you could improve to maybe limit how big your corridors are, maybe make them maximum 20 or 30 tiles long, and then have a ladder going all the way down and all the way up through your main base so there's airflow. You should have minimum of 2, maybe 3 or 4 areas in your base where it's just a ladder going straight up to the very top and straight down to the very bottom. And that helps keep everything balanced. It helps disperse heat, it helps airflow, it helps with carbon dioxide getting to the very bottom so you can take care of it easier. In this case, it looks like you've broken into the swamp biome and now all this polluted oxygen has basically taken over your base and there's not a whole lot you can do besides throw down deodorizers. Again, I would personally just restart and construct my colony in a way that doesn't allow the polluted oxygen to get through via liquid locks, and then there's no need for deodorizers, right? So that's a lot of duplicant time that you're saving by not requiring them to constantly refill the filtration medium. And you also save power, and I think it's just a lot better all around to try to avoid using buildings that are meant to be band-aid solutions. Essentially, the same thing is happening here as we discussed in the last base. There's just not a lot of room for airflow. So if we take a look at our oxygen diffusers, this one here is basically overpressurizing in this small room. There's only one tile where the airflow can come out. Maybe there's one on the other side as well, but essentially there's only one tile here. You have a lot of heat transfer going on, a lot of sources of heat, like your metal refinery and your glass forge. And you're wasting a lot of power on these gas pumps, which I assume they're meant to move air around your base. You can do that for free just by having airflow tiles and ladders set up in periodic locations, right? There's a lot that you can do for free in this game just by limiting the potential ways that your base could fail. So if you can prevent things from happening before they happen, like the polluted oxygen getting in to your main base, then you don't need any deodorizers. If you can prevent the air from being trapped in small rooms because you've entirely blocked those rooms from having any adequate airflow, and you don't need the gas pumps. So does that make sense? Like, there's a lot of areas in here where it seems like you're using band-aid solutions, which are costing you a lot of power, duplicant time, and therefore not really getting far enough into the base to make meaningful progress. But having said all that, I can tell you're a new player and that you're still experimenting with some of the game mechanics. It's really good that you made it this far and that your duplicants have 0 stress and are not sick, and you still have 30k calories of food, which is quite impressive actually for a new player at getting to cycle 300. So congrats to you on that, but there's a lot of improvements to make here, mainly with how you set up your base and airflow management and heat management. Okay, lastly we have Ghosto Matoz, who needs help. My bristle blossoms due to heat, I insulated the water. Hang on a sec. My bristle blossoms they probably mean die. Okay, my bristle blossoms died due to heat. I insulated the water 24.5 degrees Celsius, and they are still hot around 32 degrees. I'm on my last 50k calories, and what is the fastest solution to revive my colony? Let's take a look at Ghost screenshot. So what I assume is happening here, your water source is coming from the bottom. So the quickest way you can fix this are using ice temp shift plates and building them directly over your blossoms. It will help cool the surrounding area very fast and revive your blossoms just long enough that they can grow and provide you the food that you need. Now, you may have to have one duplicant dedicated just to doing this to keep your blossoms growing until you have your other duplicants fixing the problems that are happening, because the temp shift plates are only a band-aid to the much bigger problem at hand. You can cool down this area as much as you want with some ice, but it's just going to warm up again unless you fix the situation that's causing it to heat up. So right away I noticed that you have your entire power generation, or what I assume is your entire power generation, right next to your blossoms, and there's no adequate way that you're blocking the heat transfer. You do have some insulated tiles which are blocking the immediate heat transfer. Everything in this room where your coal generators are is probably very hot, and you have your manual airlock open. Even if this was closed, there would still be periodically hot air coming out of here, which is going to eventually mix into the rest of your base and get into where your blossoms are and heat everything up. So that's your main problem. And how do we deal with this right away to fix your base? What you have to do is cool the surrounding air temperature in here. Run radiant piping throughout your hydroponic farms, and this will help transfer some of that cooler water into the surrounding area. But keep in mind that the contents of the water will also get very hot quickly if the air temperature is just too hot to deal with. That's why you have to approach with ice temp shift plates first, cool down the surrounding area, build your radiant piping. But then the third thing we have to do is essentially fix the problem that is causing this to get too hot. And that's very evident if we just scroll a little bit to the left. Your entire power generation is happening all in this little block, and you're not really doing an adequate job of preventing the heat transfer. Yes, you do have insulated tiles, and that's going to prevent immediate heat transfer from the buildings themselves. It's not preventing the heat transfer from the air that's getting in here that's very hot. So for example, you have a manual airlock at the bottom. Whenever your duplicants are using this door, the hot air from the coal generators that's seeping out will eventually get into this bottom layer of your chamber where your blossoms are. And then likewise, you're probably also heating up this ladder shaft, and the air is coming through this pneumatic door and then seeping down in through the airflow tile. So you have to move this entire power generation room outside of your base. Start by building 1 or 2 generators with a smart battery outside somewhere beyond the liquid lock, and slowly reconnecting it to your main power supply of your base until you can delete every single one of these power units. That is going to help your colony immensely, keeping things under control. Like if you had other screenshots, I don't know if you have other screenshots. Oh yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So you see all this heat that's being generated is flowing outside of these doors. And you may think because you're using a manual airlock that the heat transfer is being limited, but it's really not, because every time your duplicants open that door, the hot air is going to come out, and you can see exactly where the transfer is happening. This door down here is very hot, and the air is just coming in here. You can almost see the gradient. This area where I'm circling my mouse is a little bit more orange than the outer area of this chamber. So all the hot air is coming through this door. That is your problem for sure. Long term, you have to move this power plant in order for these blossoms to survive. Or alternatively, you build your blossoms somewhere else. Maybe you can build hydroponic farms up here where it's nice and cool for them to grow, and just take the water up there instead. And that should solve your problem until you get far enough to be able to use aqua tuners. And that's it for today. I hope that these 3 colonies that I showed you will help you improve your game. If one of the people whose colonies I critiqued happens to find this video, I hope that you were able to learn something, and I hope that you check out my other videos on how you can improve your colonies in the future that you decide to build. Now lastly, I want to leave you guys with one piece of advice, and that is don't be afraid to restart. When things seem like they're too difficult to fix and they're too dire, it might be easier to just start anew, start fresh, and implement the techniques that you know do work right away at the start of your game, so that you're not going around rearranging buildings, making your spacing for airflow bigger, you're not rearranging rooms, because all that takes a lot of time, and it takes away a lot of duplicants' time from advancing in your game. When it looks like everything is going wrong and it's going to be very difficult to fix and your colony is about to die, it's okay to call it quits and look back on what went wrong, what you've learned, and start anew. This game is all about trial and error. Everybody restarts. Don't be afraid to restart. Try again, and use what you've learned to stop things from happening before you know they're going to happen. Anyways, guys, until next time, I'm Ethan, and I'll talk to you later.